At 11:47 last night, a phrase started showing up in headlines, group chats, and the kind of YouTube titles that are engineered to set your nervous system on fire. Carney freezes White House talks. And if that sounds like political theater, good. Because the real question isn't whether Mark Carney and Donald Trump are talking this week. The real question is, what happens when Canada decides it will not negotiate energy under threat? Because here's the inconvenient truth. The internet keeps skipping past. Canada isn't just America's neighbor. Canada is the backbone of a huge portion of America's imported energy, crude oil, natural gas imports, electricity imports woven into US infrastructure, so tightly that neither side can simply walk away without pain. So today on Dylan Sterling Analysis, I'm Dylan Sterling. I'm going to break down what this freeze headline really means, what we can verify about the pressure campaign around energy, how the CUSMA review clock changes everything, and what the next moves look like if Canada truly decides to push back. And yes, there is a clock, not 72 hours, 116 days, because that's roughly how long we have from March 6, 2026 until the July 1, 2026 milestone that matters most, the first joint review of CUSMA/USMCA. Let's go. If you've watched competitor channels in this space, you know the formula. A dramatic timestamp, sources say, a secret meeting, and an ultimatum. I'm not doing that. I'm giving you something much more dangerous to a propaganda ecosystem: mechanics. Here's the structure. What energy pressure from Trump actually looks like. Tariffs, leverage points, negotiation framing. Why Canada's pushback is plausible, and why it's complicated inside Canada. What it means to freeze White House talks without collapsing diplomacy. The three scenarios for the next phase, through July 1, 2026. 1. Energy pressure doesn't usually sound like "give me your oil." People imagine pressure as a direct demand. Send more oil, cut prices, approve pipelines. Sometimes it is that blunt. But in modern trade warfare, energy pressure is usually delivered through trade architecture, baseline tariffs, sector tariffs, exemptions that can be granted or revoked, and a constant threat that your access to the US market is conditional. CRS, Congressional Research Service, described the Trump administration's early posture as 25% tariffs on Canadian imports, with a lower 10% rate on Canadian energy imports, under IEEPA authority, framing it in an emergency context. That 10% on energy detail matters. It signals something strategic. The White House wants leverage, but it also knows energy is the kind of thing that can backfire fast in US inflation, refinery inputs, and electricity reliability. So the pressure is real, but it's calibrated. 2. Trump's framing. We don't need their energy versus the supply chain reality. Publicly, Trump has used rhetoric suggesting the US doesn't need Canada's cars, energy, lumber, anything they have except friendship. Reuters reported that kind of messaging around the early Carney-Trump relationship. But here's what the underlying data says. Canada is the largest supplier of US energy imports, including crude oil, natural gas, and electricity per CRS. EIA's Canada Country Analysis notes Canada was the top crude oil supplier to the US, providing about 60% of US crude oil imports in 2023, and that Canada is also effectively the top supplier of US natural gas imports. Canada's regulator, CER, puts hard 2024 numbers on it. 61.7% of US crude oil imports came from Canada. Canada supplied close to 100% of US natural gas imports, and Canada supplied 81.6% of electrical energy imported into the US. So when you hear "we don't need their energy," understand what that often means in negotiating language. It's a dominant signal, not a supply chain plan. 3. The real US ask hiding inside energy pressure, control and predictability. Energy pressure isn't only about barrels and megawatts. It's about control. Can the US assume energy flows are politically stable? Can the White House secure wins it can sell domestically, like lower prices, higher production, more pipeline capacity, more North American energy dominance? Can it tie tariff relief to Canadian concessions without calling them concessions? You can see this logic in the way energy keeps showing up as a bargaining chip in Canada. US talks alongside steel and aluminum and autos, and you can see it in the Keystone XL storyline. AP reported that Carney discussed reviving the contentious Keystone XL pipeline with Trump and framed Canada's resource relationship as leverage in a tariff fight, while also arguing US tariffs on Canadian aluminum were unwise, and making a memorable point that producing that much aluminum domestically would require the equivalent power of 10 Hoover dams. That isn't random rhetoric, that's a signal. Carney's team understands the White House sees energy as the heart of the bilateral power relationship. 1. Canada has leverage on paper. If you only look at energy flows, Canada looks like it has a big lever. CER's 2024 snapshot shows just how integrated the hydrocarbon trade is. Canada exported 4.2 million barrels of crude oil in 2024, 95.7% went to the US, about 4.0 million BD. Those crude exports to the US were valued at $140.8 billion in 2024. Canada exported 8.4 BCF/day of natural gas in 2024, all of it to the US. So yes, in a purely mechanical sense, Canada sits on a big lever, but leverage isn't the same as willingness to pull it. 2. Canada's internal constraint, Alberta plus federalism. Here's the part competitor scripts often skip because it's less cinematic. Canada is a federation, energy is political inside Canada, and Alberta, the oil and gas heavyweight, has repeatedly signaled it does not want to weaponize exports to the US in ways that reduce shipments. AP reported that Alberta's premier would not support stopping energy shipments to the US as tariff retaliation, and this is consistent with the broader pattern Reuters has noted. Canadian officials can float energy as a lever, but Alberta, the main exporting province, pushes back hard against restricting exports. So Canada's pushback cannot be a simple turn off the tap. Canada's pushback, if it's smart, has to be something else: procedural, strategic, timed and politically survivable inside Canada. 3. That's why Carney's pushback strategy has leaned into build, diversify, don't beg. AP has covered Carney's repeated framing of Canada as an energy superpower and his emphasis on diversification away from relying on a single trade partner. Politico's E&E coverage described Carney pitching nation-building energy projects, positioning them as a response to Trump's trade war and a way to strengthen Canada economically. And Carney's government has also done inside Canada statecraft. For example, the official Prime Minister of Canada site has a major Canada-Alberta partnership announcement tied to energy demand, infrastructure, interties, and nuclear, part of a broader posture of building capacity and resilience. That's the pushback. Reduce vulnerability. Because the most humiliating position in a trade fight is not losing a tariff dispute. It's realizing you have no alternative buyers, no alternative routes, no alternative plan. Now we get to the heart of this video. Because freeze talks can mean two totally different things, meaning A, diplomacy is dead. That would mean Canada refuses meetings, pulls staff, shuts down channels, escalates publicly, and treats the relationship as purely hostile. That's not what serious governments usually do when they share the world's most integrated border economy. Meaning B, leader-level theatre is paused, process continues. This is much more plausible and much more powerful. It means no photo-op summits, no Oval Office humiliation roulette, no reactive negotiating in public, and the real work gets moved into structured channels and scheduled processes, especially the CUSMA review. And here's the key confirmation that this is Carney's instinct. In a January 29, 2026 report from the Canadian press, carried by 650 CKOM, Carney explicitly said, "I find one of the most effective ways to negotiate is not to negotiate in public, so we'll wait until we have the broader discussions with the United States as part of a review." 4. That one line is the freeze explained in plain language, not "we will never speak again," more like "we're not doing public bargaining, we're moving this into the review." The CUSMA review is the real arena. This isn't a vague future concept. Brookings explains that the agreement's joint review by the Free Trade Commission is tied to the 6th anniversary of entry into force, July 1, 2026. AP also reported Canada and the US plan to launch formal discussions to review the agreement in mid-January, as of a December 2025 update, with Dominic LeBlanc positioned as a key point person. So here is the strategic logic of a talk freeze. Carney doesn't have to storm out. He just has to say, in effect, "We are not trading energy under threats. We are not negotiating in public. We are not doing side deals that lock in dependency. We will deal with the structure, Kuwasma review on a defined timetable. That's how a government freezes the White House show, while keeping the state-to-state machinery intact. And there's more evidence this fold it into the review posture has been explicit. A Reuters item surfaced via a news crawl described Carney saying a planned trade deal on key sectors was unlikely, and the issue would be covered in the upcoming review of the trade pact. After talks were frozen earlier, in that reporting, Trump froze talks in October over the Ontario ad episode. So the freeze isn't a sudden new invention, it's an evolved strategy. Stop trying to win a sprint and prepare to win the scheduled marathon. Now we open the red folder and talk about why energy turns negotiations toxic so quickly. 1. Crude oil. Not all barrels are equal. The US imports crude oil, but US refineries are not all built the same. API notes the US primarily imports heavy crude oils from Canada and Mexico, and in 2024, a large share of US crude imports came from Canada, including a dominant share of heavy crude imports. That matters because replace Canada isn't as simple as signing a new contract. It's logistics, refinery configurations, pipeline networks, and pricing structures. 2. Natural gas. The import picture is narrower than people think. EIA's natural gas explainer notes pipeline imports from Canada remain an important source of US natural gas supply, especially in winter. And CER's snapshot is even more blunt. In 2024, Canada provided close to 100% of US natural gas imports. So when politicians treat natural gas as a toy in a negotiating sandbox, they're playing with something that can show up quickly in heating costs, grid reliability, and industrial input prices. 3. Electricity, huge in imports share, smaller in overall US consumption, but still politically sharp. CER says Canada supplied 81.6% of electrical energy imported into the US in 2024. Axios has noted that Canada is by far the largest source of US electricity imports, even though electricity imports overall are less than 1% of US consumption. That's why electricity is a perfect retaliation threat and a dangerous retaliation tool. It's symbolically strong, regionally impactful, border states, but not necessarily a nationwide knockout punch. 4. Energy is also Canada's vulnerability. Here's the part that makes this a chess match. Canada exports huge volumes to the US. CER shows in 2024, Canada exported 6.3 million BOE/ of hydrocarbons globally, with the US FIME accounting for 94.4%. EIA's Canada analysis similarly points out Canada's energy exports are overwhelmingly destined for the United States. So if Carney pushes back by threatening energy exports, he has to manage the rebound. Price discounts, storage constraints, pipeline bottlenecks, and domestic politics. That's why the realistic pushback is not turn it off. It's change the structure that makes threats effective. Competitor scripts love secret meetings. The real-world version is more boring and more lethal. A freeze is a weapon when it does 3 things. Weapon #1. It denies Trump the stage. If Carney keeps leader-level interactions rare and conditional, Trump can't easily manufacture a spectacle. And that matters because modern negotiation is not only policy, it's media. Weapon #2. It forces the US into institutions and calendars. CUSMA review has formal roles, defined procedures, stakeholders, and an accountability structure that reduces the effectiveness of last-minute, improvisational pressure. Brookings' explanation of the July 2026 joint review milestone is the anchor here. Weapon #3. It shifts Canada's posture from asking for relief to setting conditions. When Canada frames the discussion as we'll address it in the review, it's implicitly saying, we are not negotiating under threat, we are negotiating under law. And CRS documents show Canada has already been framing US tariffs as violating USMCA and challenging them through WTO channels, while also exploring non-tariff measures with provinces. A freeze makes sense when you pair it with legal posture, diversification posture, and internal resilience building. Now let's translate energy pressure into objectives. Objective 1. Lock in North America first energy flows, not just to have Canadian energy flowing, but to have Canada behave like a guaranteed supplier, politically compliant, strategically aligned. That's why the conversation keeps circling. Pipelines, tariff carve-outs, and energy partnership as a price for market access. Objective 2. Use energy as leverage to extract concessions in non-energy domains. Trade disputes rarely stay in their lane. CRS lists multiple ongoing US-Canada trade friction points beyond energy: digital services tax issues, dairy market access, softwood lumber. These become bargaining chips. So the energy pressure can be a wedge. Give us X on energy, and we'll talk about Y on tariffs. Objective 3. Force Canada to admit dependence. In every asymmetric negotiation, the stronger party wants the weaker party to say the quiet part out loud. We can't survive without you. Carney's entire strategy, energy superpower, diversification, nation-building projects, is designed to prevent that admission from ever becoming policy. Here are the realistic pushback tools that do not require Canada to do a suicidal energy cutoff. Tool 1. Procedural pushback, the review funnel. This is the freeze. Carney signals, we're not negotiating in public. We'll deal with the US in the review. Tool 2. Internal market strengthening, reduce US leverage. This includes removing internal barriers, building electricity strategy, building export infrastructure, and nation-building project acceleration. You can see it in Carney's public posture and in official announcements framing grid expansion and energy infrastructure as central goals. Tool 3. Targeted retaliation signaling without pulling the trigger. Reuters reported Canadian officials floating oil and gas exports as cards that could be played if tariffs escalate, while also noting Alberta's resistance. This is classic deterrence. You don't have to fire the weapon, you have to convince the other side it exists. Tool 4. Electricity as a regional pressure point. Ontario has previously announced and then suspended measures like an electricity export surcharge, per CRS. That signals capability, without committing to long-term escalation. Let's make the countdown real. July 1st, 2026 is not just a date. It's when the institutional moment arrives where Canada, the US, and Mexico confirm ongoing support or don't, and the agreement's future trajectory becomes an explicit negotiation topic. So if you're watching Just Now videos claiming Carney ended talks today, here's the calmer, scarier truth. Carney doesn't need to end talks. He needs to survive the runway to July with Canada's economy intact and Canada's political coalition unified. That's why AP covered Carney meeting with premiers and positioning Canada for the coming review. And that's why Carney has also placed personnel and structure around Washington-facing diplomacy, ambassador changes, negotiating teams, etc. Scenario 1. The quiet energy truce. Most likely, Canada avoids dramatic export threats. The US avoids dramatic energy tariffs beyond what already exists. Both sides posture publicly, but technical channels keep moving. This is the path of least immediate economic pain, and it fits with how both sides have kept negotiations alive even after public breakdowns, like the digital services tax episode in 2025. What it looks like to viewers, nothing happened. What it really is, controlled damage. Scenario 2. The freeze becomes policy. Plausible. Carney sticks to no public bargaining, no leader-level deal-making, everything into the CUSMA review funnel. We have Carney's explicit quote supporting that posture. Wait for the broader discussions as part of the review. Risk. Trump escalates tariffs or seeks bilateral side pressure points. Reward. Canada stops getting whipsawed by daily headline negotiations. Scenario 3. The energy card gets played. Least likely, highest stakes. Canada moves from signaling to action. Export tariffs, restrictions, or targeted measures tied to energy or critical inputs. CRS has noted Canada has considered non-tariff measures related to critical minerals and energy, and Reuters reporting has documented officials discussing oil and gas as leverage. Why it's least likely? Internal Canadian politics plus Alberta, plus blowback risk. Why it's highest stakes? It forces the US to respond in a way that can hit inflation and industrial inputs. Here's the synthesis. What the best analysts see that the loudest titles don't. Energy is not just a commodity. Energy is the physical layer of sovereignty. And the reason Carney's pushback resonates in Canada, even among people who don't agree on climate policy, is because Canadians have lived through a year of being reminded that tariffs can be weaponized, market access can be conditional, and even basic respect can become a bargaining chip. That's why CRS described the strain in bilateral relations and the discussion inside Canada about reducing dependence on the US, and it's why Carney's posture, Don't negotiate in public. Wait for the review. Isn't just political style. It's survival strategy. So here's the real question. Drop your answer in the comments. If you were Carney, would you keep energy cooperation on the table as a stabilizer, or would you treat energy as leverage and accept the blowback? Because Canada's pushback has a ceiling if it's only rhetorical, but Canada's pushback has a cost if it becomes operational. And the smartest move might be the one that looks boring. Freeze the theatre, keep the machinery running, and march toward July 1st. If you want more analysis like this, fast, structured, and sourced, subscribe to Dylan Sterling Analysis. I'm Dylan Sterling. See you in the next one.